have to continue to believe that leaders will function in the interest of their own country. And I have a hard time accepting that any leader might do the kind of damage to his own auto industry that would happen if he were to bring in such a tariff on Canadian auto manufacturers, given the integration of the parts supply chain, of the auto supply chains through the Canada-U.S. border.
Choosing his words very carefully, Prime Minister Trudeau clearly hoping that President Donald Trump does not lash out again at Canada, currently his favorite target, and ratchet up the damaging trade war that's already underway. But between Donald Trump's steady stream of threats to Canadian trade, where does that leave things like NAFTA? Does Canada stand up to the U.S. with more tariffs, or finally offer to give something up, maybe protection around, say, dairy, in order to stop an expanded trade war? Let's find out where this is all going. Joining me now, Rona Ambrose, the former interim Conservative leader and a member of the Prime Minister's NAFTA Council, Advisory Council, and John Manley, the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada, and a recovering politician himself.
Totally recovered.
Great to have both of you here. Let me start with Rona Ambrose. Look, there is concerns that Canada on July 1st, we're going to hit the U.S. with almost $17 billion of tariffs. What's the current status? Are we prepared for an escalation, or is there any avenue for de-escalation?
I think we have to be prepared for escalation, and I say that because the NAFTA talks are in a pause right now. We aren't at the table talking to each other, not because of anything other than the fact the Mexican election is happening. Everybody knew this would be a break, so Mexico's busy. We're going to have to wait for a while. But in the meantime, July 1st hits, and that means our tariffs hit. And we are not backing down off that. So we are going to be hitting the U.S. with $16 billion worth of tariffs. I think we all know by now how President Trump reacts to anyone standing up to him. So I think we do have to be concerned about escalation, and we all know what could potentially come after that in September, which is his threats against our auto sector and a 25% tariff on Canadian autos and auto parts going into the United States. And that would be devastating for our economy.
John, what does that mean? I mean, the fear of escalation, especially the fear of what Rona's just talking about, the tariffs on autos, is real. What are your CEOs in your group telling you about this? Are they optimistic, pessimistic? What are they doing?
I don't think anyone is still in the optimistic category, regrettably. They were for a while, because there was kind of an underlying belief that this was all bluster. And at the end of the day, a little bit like the Prime Minister was saying, surely he wouldn't do things that would hurt his own economy.
Right.
We now realize that actually he will, and he has, and he may continue to do so. And we're no longer pursuing this along any kind of traditional path where the rules of economics are considered to exist and people behave in a rational manner. That's not what we're doing. So, you impose tariffs, as they've talked about in the auto sector, and the report should come in August. You devastate North American automobile production in the short term.
Do you devastate the economy here in Canada?
Well, you certainly do in Ontario, if it really comes to that, unless you find some way that we support it in some fashion. But the whole industry is highly integrated in North America, so there are no producers. Whether the cars are rolling off the assembly line in Kentucky and Ontario or in Mexico, they're all integrated.
Okay, Rona Ambrose, here's what we're trying to read. Everyone's trying to read the Trump tea leaves, as it were. I don't know if there's any pattern to them at all, but let's throw this one out. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross admitted that Canada is no longer a security threat. Security threat, Section 232, was how the U.S. had justified the current tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, just because Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, says it, I know that it should be, under normal circumstances, meaningful signal that maybe they're turning. Is it a meaningful signal in the era of Donald Trump?
Listen, I don't think so, even though it should be. I mean, it's not just that Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, said that Canada is not a national security threat. He is in charge of the very department that put forward these tariffs under the guise of a national security threat. He's actually in charge of this very action and policy against Canada. So it is bizarre to hear him say this now. And this idea that he and others around Trump keep saying, oh, the auto tariffs have nothing to do with NAFTA, and the steel and aluminum tariffs have nothing to do with NAFTA. So this threat on your economy, Canada, actually has nothing to do with the NAFTA negotiations. I don't think anyone buys that. We know very well this is a huge stick they're using as leverage to get us to sign a bad deal or bully us into some kind of a deal. And it's, that leaves us with not a ton of leverage because of the size of their economy. So we're in a difficult spot, and I think at some point we're going to have to make difficult decisions.
Okay, well, let's talk about how to maybe de-escalate. Some are saying Trump keeps threatening about Canada's protectionism on dairy. I don't want to get into the back and forth of who's more protection, but do we maybe, John Manley, Canada say, okay, you want it to open up dairy, we're willing to talk about that. Or you want some other discussions, we are willing to negotiate on some things, put some things on the table. What should Canada give up?
Well, I think I'd be surprised if we haven't already told them that we're willing to negotiate on dairy. Because as Rona will remember, the Harper government negotiated on dairy in the TPP negotiations, right, and agreed to give the United States significant increases in quota in the dairy sector coming into Canada, as we've done previously with the European Union in the CETA negotiations. A little bit like a rheostat. You can turn that dial, give them some more access, compensate the Canadian farmers, and everyone goes on to live another day.
Right, that might be one way. By the way, Donald Trump's also floated a bilateral agreement, basically throwing Mexico under the bus, Rona Ambrose. Is that something that Canada should now start considering?
Look, I mean, I think you consider anything, but the reality is we don't have the offer of a bilateral deal with America that looks any different than what's in front of us right now, which is not great. I mean, why would we think that they would negotiate in better faith or stop the imposition of tariffs on our economy any more than they are right now? So, I mean, I think there's strength in numbers. I do think it's better to be at the table with Mexico. And look how hard it is to negotiate an existing agreement. Imagine what it would be like to negotiate with Donald Trump with a brand new Canada-US agreement. So, and then we've got to get Congress on board. I mean, it's, I think, vastly more difficult to think that we can start fresh, get rid of NAFTA and start fresh with this brand new Canada-US bilateral deal. I think that's an oversimplification of a solution to what is a very challenging problem in front of us.
And what I'd add to that, Rona, is that, in the context of NAFTA, in many ways, the most important sector reliant on the NAFTA zero tariffs is the auto sector, and that is definitely a trilateral proposition. That sector is in 3 countries. That's just the way it is. And try to unscramble that egg and then start over again. Plus the problem of trying to present not 1 but 2 agreements that are brand new to a Congress that may have turned over by the midterms in November. That's not just going to happen. This is time for Canada to say, look, we've got to grow up. We can't just be the little brother anymore. We've got to look after our interests. Countries don't have friends, they have interests. And we better figure out what ours are and how we serve them and not always rely on the United States to float our boats.
Yeah, well, that's time, though. That will take time. All right, I got to leave it there.
Time for Plan B.
Yeah, Plan C. Rona Ambrose and John Manley, great to have both of you.